What is type 3 diabetes? And is it linked to Alzheimer's disease? Is it inevitable that we as diabetics will also succumb to this disease too? How can it be avoided? And what is modern science now saying are the direct causes? Starting today and ahead of everybody else, you will know the steps to protect the most important asset you have, your brain. But before we begin, let me welcome all of you resilient diabetics out there. This is the channel we turn ordinary, struggling diabetics into extraordinarily well-controlled diabetics. If you don't know who I am and you are brand new to this channel, I welcome you. My name is Jay Sampat, and I became an insulin-dependent diabetic a little over 6 years ago due to an autoimmune attack that caused the destruction of my pancreas. That was as a result of a severe gluten allergy attack. So basically, I am the proud owner of a pancreas that's gone on a permanent and lifelong vacation. So not only am I diabetic, just like you, where we will be walking that walk and talking that talk together, but I do also have a University Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition dietetics, and that does come in very handy in discussing all the intricacies of being a diabetic. As with all of my videos, this should not be considered personal medical advice. This is my interpretation of the latest research. If you want medical advice, please always consult your doctor. Scientists are now beginning to talk about another form of diabetes, type 3 diabetes. And this now has my attention, and it should be on your radar too. This form of diabetes is associated with Alzheimer's disease. But let me be very clear at this point. It is really more of a research term rather than a medical term. The classification of type 3 diabetes is highly controversial, and it is not widely accepted by the medical community as a clinical diagnosis. Type 3 diabetes has been proposed to describe the hypothesis that Alzheimer's disease, which is a major cause of dementia, is triggered by a type of insulin resistance and insulin-like growth factor dysfunction that occurs specifically inside our brains. Alzheimer's is simply now claimed to be diabetes of the brain. This is a progressive neurodegenerative disease characterized by the decline of memory, cognitive function, and the changes in behavior and personality. The most common early symptoms include trouble remembering new information because the disease typically impacts the part of the brain associated with learning first. As Alzheimer's advances, symptoms do get more severe and include disorientation and confusion. Eventually, speaking, swallowing, and even walking can become difficult. At this point, there is no way to prevent, cure, or even slow down Alzheimer's disease. This disease is the 6th leading cause of death here in the United States and the 5th leading death for those aged 65 and older. Currently, 5.4 million Americans suffer from Alzheimer's, including an estimated 200,000 under the age of 65. Nearly 2/3 of those with Alzheimer's are women. Why is this so important to you? To be frank, it could not only affect you directly, but you may be the caregiver to a loved one with Alzheimer's too. The first thing that has become very apparent, those who have diabetes have an increased risk of Alzheimer's and related dementia later in life. The exact mechanisms are not quite fully understood yet. However, when scientists look at how the brain processes energy, it seems this process changes in people with diabetes. Are the high sugars and the high circulating insulin levels partially responsible? Or are they other factors? That is what we will answer today. In the episode on high blood pressure and diabetes, we found out that around 75 million American adults have high blood pressure. So that's roughly around 1 in 3. But at the same time, 84 million American adults, more than 1 in 3, have prediabetes. And 90% of the people with prediabetes don't even know they have it yet. We already covered the common link between both, which was, if you remember, hyperinsulinemia, or high circulating insulin levels. This is due to the very manipulated and contrived heart-healthy diet experiment we've been running on ourselves for over half a century. A diet very high in carbohydrates thus requires high insulin amounts. It is basically destroying our body cells from the inside out. If you missed that really important video on blood pressure and diabetes, I'll create a link in the description box below which will cover the common connections between both conditions. And then you will also be able to link those ties to what is presented on Alzheimer's today. So, are we to think that the brain is somehow immune to elevated blood sugars and high circulating insulin levels? The billion-dollar question is, at what blood sugar and high circulating insulin levels does damage begin to occur? And most importantly, can it be prevented? I can tell you this: there are around 240 drugs who have already gone through trials for Alzheimer's, and they've all failed miserably. So we're going to have to put on our detective hats and face some hardened realities as resilient diabetics. I've said this from day one. We as diabetics have two concerns. One is the amount of blood sugars we have at any given moment. And second, just as importantly, the amounts of insulin needed to remove the blood sugars from the bloodstream. They both have separate but connected physiological ways of damaging the body. Insulin's role is through an inflammatory chemical process, whereas the floating blood sugars work through a physical, mechanical method of destroying body cells. In terms of our brains, once prediabetes and diabetes occur, the first mode begins. The excessive sugar starts to eat away or corrode and physically damage what's known as the blood-brain barrier. This is the barrier that protects the brain from toxic substances. So in other words, the barrier becomes leaky and weak, thus the delicate brain then becomes compromised and impaired. So just like our kidneys and our circulatory system, both the insulin and the blood sugars give this 1-2 knockout punch together. There is another new and evolving understanding of how insulin resistance may affect the brain too. For many years, there was a long-standing belief that the brain was not made of insulin-sensitive tissues. But over the last few years, this notion has changed dramatically. They now know that insulin does get across the blood-brain barrier in different areas of the brain and also gets into that spinal fluid, which is the fluid that bathes the brain. The brain tissue is exposed to insulin at somewhat reduced levels compared to other tissues in the body, but is still very much regulated in response to the things that cause insulin secretion, like eating a lot of carbohydrates in a meal or a lot of sugars. It's all the same to the brain too. Whether the excessive sugars came from slices of whole wheat bread or from cans of soda, it does not matter. We also now know that this response in the brain has effects on both the metabolism of the brain and the way the brain signals the body for different bodily functions. They also now know to some degree the insulin resistance in the brain initiates a cascade of events of metabolic dysfunction with increased oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, and an accumulation of toxic amyloid beta protein aggregates, also known as amyloid plaques. So in other words, the area or space in between the neurons, which are called the synapses, becomes gummed up and they no longer work. These synapses are where neurotransmitters are released, where signals are transmitted or communications between cells happen. To complicate things even further, the pro-carbohydrate biased researchers state that neither hyperglycemia nor peripheral insulin resistance is necessary for Alzheimer's to develop. Okay, I'll bite on that for now. They want to only blame predisposing life factors and chronic low-grade inflammation as the cause. And why would they say that? Because 80% of those with Alzheimer's also have cardiovascular disease. But here's the problem. We already know cardiovascular disease is not from fats and cholesterol, but rather it's a disease from too much inflammation. From what again? Excessive carbohydrates and insulin. Knowing all this now, how do we prevent or at least slow down the progression of type 3 diabetes? I'll give you my best educated list. And as for the experts with their heads in the sand who still want you to eat those highly dense, starchy-based carbohydrates at every meal, and then recommend even more carbohydrate-based snacks in between those meals and looking to blame other factors, we will cover those too. First and foremost, the most important component on this list, holding that A1C as low as possible while keeping insulin levels well balanced and at minimal levels. This is why I am very personally uncomfortable with an A1C over around 5.6. Now, why would that be? Because nerve damage seems to start and occur at levels around here and higher. So why would it be not plausible for brain damage to also begin at or around these levels too? My endocrinologist wants my A1C to be around 6 or higher. And I have passionately discussed this with her and expressed my main concerns. Those numbers are not appropriate for my personal long-term health. The more I learn, the more I've realized why some of the gold standard doctors want all of their diabetic patients, including type 1s, to have their A1Cs in the 4s. In the episode, How Long Can You Live with Diabetes, which I will also set up in the description box below, you will need to understand why many doctors are mandated to keep your A1C levels above those critical non-diabetic levels. And unfortunately, it has nothing to do with your best interest at heart, but their bottom line. Second on the list, get well-rested sleep. This is where not only the body, but more importantly, the brain gets repaired. Sleep plays a role in clearing those amyloid plaques out of the brain. Studies have shown these amyloid plaques increase around 5% in participant brains after losing just one good night's of sleep. Third, get in some exercise. But there is a caveat. Exercise is a stressor. So you want to be at a point where you can exercise and reap the rewards of having controlled blood sugars after the exercise. The big picture. Exercise increases insulin sensitivity, thus lowering the amounts of insulin produced by the pancreas. Or if you're like me, it means you get to drop the requirements of the insulin dose. So less insulin means less bodily inflammation. Fourth, learning and continually exercising the brain with new knowledge. You do not want to learn the same things you are aware of, but you actually have to challenge the brain. This then creates new connections in the brain, thus it can rewire itself. Learn a new language, for example, or better yet, watch all of my videos. So, watching Resilient Diabetic could be a cure for Alzheimer's in more ways than one. Number 5, and one of the most controversial topics, statin therapy is another main concern when it comes to brain health. It is mandated by many doctors in certain health institutions to put all their diabetic patients on these anti-cholesterol drugs. But here's the problem. The brain has a higher cholesterol content than any other organ in the body. In fact, around 25% of the body's cholesterol is found in that small organ. The brain is cholesterol rich on purpose because it needs a large amount of cholesterol to function properly and for basic cellular structure. So statins do cross that blood-brain barrier and enter the brain cells, where they reduce the brain's natural ability to make cholesterol that is desperately needed to maintain itself. Sixth, vegetable oils and brain health. I bet you're surprised to hear this. What would one have to do with the other? The link is the inflammation vegetable oils produce in the body. The more one consumes vegetable oils, which are high in oxidative polyunsaturated oils, the greater the insulin resistance one will have. The greater the resistance, the greater the floating amounts of sugars there will be, and the resulting insulin needed to lower it back down. This then creates this vicious, unbreakable cycle that aids in the destruction of all the body cells, including the brain. I will also gladly set up a video on the history of vegetable oils in the description box below. This will undoubtedly challenge your brain and your understanding of how much damage these oils are really causing. So diet, as you can see, may be the biggest determiner if one gets Alzheimer's. That is, controlling both blood sugars and the amounts of insulin needed to lower and normalize those sugars. Each of my videos builds a base of knowledge for the very next. So if you're new, I will also set up a playlist for you at the end of this video with a multitude of videos that will cover the foods and the carbs I do recommend and why. Which foods that not only keep inflammation down, thus an A1C in the low fives, but just as importantly, have me using the least amounts of insulin so my blood sugars remain flatlined and well controlled all day long. That keeps this old diabetic feeling energetic, strong, and vibrant all day long too. If you're on your desktop or laptop, use that mouse to click this upcoming box. If you're on a mobile device, just tap that with your fingers. The first is the link to subscribe to this all-important life-changing channel. The second is the link to the playlist I will create for you on the video on foods. So, have a great and productive day, and we will see you soon with another new episode, which I said are always released weekly. Bye for now.